Hello, this is Jove Aguas, and welcome to my lectures in philosophical anthropology. This is now the second part of my introduction, which is a survey of the different philosophical notions about the human person. So, in the second part of the introduction, we will focus on the Western conceptions of man. So, the philosophical conceptions of the human person from the Western or from Western philosophy can be traced to the development of philosophy in the West. Okay, so the development of these notions is related to the search for the truth and knowledge about reality. And just like in the Eastern philosophy, the conception of man or the human person is viewed as part of reality. But there is a significant difference between the Eastern conception of reality and the Western conception of reality. For one, in the Eastern conception or Oriental conception, they always consider reality to be a whole. Okay, even with different parts or different aspects, it's still the same reality. So we have notions of the Brahman as encompassing the whole of reality, the idea of nature, etc. But in the Western conception, uh, they always consider reality to be somehow dualistic, right? There's always some aspects that are different. For example, there is the material aspect of reality and there is the spiritual aspect of reality. It can be compared to the distinction between the Atman and the Brahman because there is only one reality. It is not distinguished between the spiritual or the material. But in the Western conception, we see that. Okay, there's always conception of a distinction of the reality as composed of many different parts that are sometimes contradictory or contrary to one another. So uh, we divide the development of Western philosophy into four periods. You have the ancient period, which is the Greek philosophy, and then you have the medieval period, which is the dominated by Christian thinkers, and then you have modern philosophy, and then of course you have contemporary philosophy. So let's start with ancient philosophy. Okay, so this is Greek. This is Greek philosophy, and it is generally described to be cosmocentric, a cosmocentric philosophy, because, of course, the term cosmos from world, okay, from the world, and the search for the truth in philosophy is anchored or based on knowledge about the nature of the universe or about the cosmos. So man is conceived to be part of nature. Okay, so in that respect, it's also similar to the Oriental conception. Man is part of nature. And for the Greeks, man is actually a microcosm in itself. It's a small world, okay, that who possesses realities or qualities that we can find in the cosmos. And these are the qualities that we categorize as either animate or inanimate. Okay, animate, inanimate. The inanimate would refer to the material or the physical, and the animate would refer to the spiritual. Okay, the spiritual. All right. So, uh, Socrates, one of the uh, most popular philosopher of the ancient Greek period, he is actually the student or the teacher of Plato. One of the so Socrates is one of the famous. He's actually the one who, well, not necessarily the first, but a very important figure in philosophy. Okay, so very important that we actually refer or use the life of Socrates as a kind of demarcation in the sub periods of Greek philosophy. Like the those philosophers before Socrates are called pre-Socratic, and those philosophers after the life of Socrates are called the post-Socratic. And the period of the life of Socrates and his student Plato and Aristotle is called the Socratic era. So that's he's a very important philosopher. Okay, so he advocated moral transformation among the citizens of Athens, and one of his famous uh, teachings, or say dictum, is know thyself. Okay, and he's the one who said the unexamined life is not worth living. Okay, so uh, he's known for his dialogues. Okay, he's known for his dialogues because his style of teaching is like conversation. He will ask question, and then his friends or his audience will answer him, and then he will ask another question. So it's a form of dialogue. And these conversations or dialogue were recorded by his student Plato, who actually wrote several dialogues, books on the Socratic dialogue. Okay, so that is his unique way of teaching. Now, the philosopher's task, according to Socrates, is to provoke people into thinking for themselves rather than teach them anything. Okay, so his contribution to the history of thought is not really a very systematic doctrine, but a kind of method of thinking that we have to examine our life, examine ourselves. Okay, constantly ask questions. Okay, so there's a need for a kind of analytical examination of the grounds of our belief. So if you say we have to be just, then he will ask, what do you mean by justice? What do you mean by being just? So he advocated, or he wants us to clarify the definition of the concepts that we use. Okay, and of course, uh, one thing that we can say of Socrates is that as the human person or man himself must examine constantly himself. Okay. Now his student Plato, uh, the one who recorded his dialogues, followed many of the initial ideas of Socrates, like the idea of the immortality of the soul, that the soul is immortal. Okay, and so he followed up on this. He actually developed this idea of immortality by pointing out that the reality that we exist, that we live in, is actually just the physical world that we live in. It's just a copy of a more perfect world, or a perfect world, which he calls the world of ideas. Okay, the world of ideas. So this is a two-world theory of Plato. There is the perfect world, the world of ideas, and our world this world that we live in is just a copy or a shadow of that perfect world. And our soul actually pre-existed in the world of forms, or the perfect world. And then by some development, it was kicked out from that world of the perfect world. It got actually united with the body, so that man is a soul or a spirit trapped in the body. Okay, but the thing is that according to Plato, we don't realize, or we don't recognize this perfect world, this world of ideas, because we are here in the physical world, and we think that this world, which is just a copy, is real. No? Somehow similar to the illusion of Hinduism. No? So he explains this through this famous allegory of the cave. Okay, the famous allegory of the cave. He said there is a group of men, or prisoners, cavemen, who are imprisoned in the cave, and they are chained. Okay, they are chained inside the cave, and they are facing the wall of the cave. Behind them is a fire, but of course, because the fire is behind them, they don't know that behind them is a fire. All they can see is the shadow that is projected to the wall. Their shadow and the shadow of other objects, okay, that is being caused by the fire behind the cave. So they thought that the shadows are real. All right. Until finally, one person, one caveman, was able to escape, was able to unchain himself, and he was able to look back and saw the fire and the shadow projected to the wall. So he realized that the shadows are not really real, just a shadow, just a projection. And he was able to go out of the cave and see the the world outside of the cave, and then he saw the sun, the bright light of the sun. So he was rather confused because the reality that he experienced outside the cave is different from the reality inside the cave. So he went back to the cave and he told his fellow prisoners that these things that we see on the wall of the cave are just shadows. They are not real. The real thing is what is outside of the cave. Of course, the other prisoners did not believe him. Now, Plato explained this that the world, our physical world, is like being in a cave. We see here appearances, but they are not real. They're just shadows. And the world outside is the real world, and that is the world of ideas. Okay, so we need to, we need to enlighten. We need to study. We need to know about the world of ideas. Okay, so, and then of course he taught virtue, that we have to develop our virtue, develop the virtue of temperance, develop the virtue of um, wisdom, the virtue of courage, and the virtue of justice. Okay, so then of course the next philosopher in the Greek philosophy is the philosopher par excellence, Aristotle. Aristotle studied under Plato for 20 years. He studied in the school of Plato called the Academy for 20 years. But after that, he left and actually established his own school. He did not subscribe to the idea of Plato that the world or that man is, that there are two worlds, like the world of ideas or world of forms and the physical world, and that the ideas are real and the things that we see here are just copies. According to Aristotle, the things that we see in this world are actually real. And the ideas, those ideas are not really existing outside or in a separate world. The ideas exist in the mind. They are our conceptions. They are our products. Okay, and for him, man is not just a spirit. He's both body and spirit. He's actually a rational animal. Okay, animal because we share with the animals many of the qualities, many of the characteristics. Like we have the power of vegetation. We nourish, we grow, we reproduce. We have the power of sensation or the power of the senses, of the emotion. But we are not just like the animals because of these powers or operations. We are rational, meaning we have reason. Okay, so these three vital operations, the vegetative, the sensate, and the rational, are all found in man. All right, and man is composed of both body, which manifests the animal powers, but more than the animals, we have rational faculty, we have reason, we have spirit, we have a rational soul, and our rational soul is spiritual. Okay, we cannot, of course, we cannot have a man without the body and the soul. So the body and the soul are, for Aristotle, are substantially united. Okay, now that's about the philosophy of the Greeks. Now let's go to the next period, medieval philosophy. And medieval philosophy could be described as theocentric. Theocentric in the sense that the search for the truth is centered on God. Okay, centered on God. And for of course the philosophers of the medieval period, they're Christians. All right, they're Christians. Many of them, if not all, are clerics, meaning they are church people. They're priests or bishops. Some even became archbishop. Right, and of course for them, God is the supreme being who created the world. So the world is a creation of God. Everything in the world is a creation of God, including man. We are all creatures. God is the creator. We are all creatures. Okay? And man was created in the image and likeness of God. And this image is based on the fact that we have a spirit. God is spirit. We have the spirit. So we are an image of God in that sense. Okay, so we are all part of God's creation. Now, the main philosophers during this period, we should say, are Saint Augustine and Saint Thomas Aquinas. Saint Augustine followed the philosophy of Plato about the two-world theory. So he subscribed to the idea of Plato that there is a perfect world and there is this physical world. But according to St. Augustine, this perfect world, this world of ideas that Plato is talking about, it's actually the world of the kingdom of God. Okay, heaven, and this physical world is a creation of that of God. Okay, so Saint Thomas followed the philosophy of Aristotle. He expounded on the idea of Aristotle of man as a rational animal. And he also subscribed to the idea of one of the Roman philosophers, Boethius, who said that man is a person of individual substance of a rational nature. Well, these concepts are rather very complicated, and we're going to discuss that in detail when we go to this part of our class or our lectures, in the succeeding lectures. All right. So the human person. So when we use the term person, and it was actually introduced to us by Augustine and and Aquinas. Of course, the origin of that is one of the originator of that idea is Boethius himself. Okay, so for the medieval thinkers, man is a spiritual being because he is a soul. He has a soul. Okay, and this soul is rational. This soul uh, is has an intellect. The soul, man is a spiritual being, and well, the 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 end or the supreme, the ultimate end of man is for his spirit to be reunited with God. Okay, or to enjoy eternal happiness with God, eternal salvation in God. Of course, there is still in Christian philosophy. Of course, there is the aspect of the teachings of Christ, or teachings about salvation, teaching about redemption of man, and man, and why does man have to be redeemed? Because of the original sin, okay, the fall of man. Okay, so Christ came here to redeem us. Okay, and we need to believe in the words of Christ in order for us to be redeemed, to be saved. Okay, so but all in all, in medieval philosophy, we say that man is a spiritual being. This spiritual being is created by God. Okay, and he's created in the image of God, and because of that being an image of God, then we enjoy dignity, or we have basic worth. Okay, we have an intrinsic value. Okay, now let's go to modern philosophy. This period could be generally characterized as anthropocentric, rationalistic, empirical. Okay, uh, the search for truth was centered on man, human reason, and of course on his sense experience. Okay, so gone is the idea that man is, or the idea of God as the creator. Of course, the idea of God as creator is still there, but the focus was on man with his natural powers, reason, freedom. Okay, so if the medieval thinkers relied more on faith, more on the authority of the church, the modern thinkers relied more on man's innate powers, his reason, his ability to perceive, his ability to experience, and his ability to reason out. Okay, and one of those who somehow what do you call this, who exhibited this capacity or ability of man to think is the French philosopher René Descartes, who introduced the idea of the cogito. Cogito means a thinking being. Okay? In his desire to establish philosophy on solid foundation, he doubted his beliefs because he wanted to establish philosophy on certain ground, and he said there are so many beliefs. I do not know which of them are true. So he started, you know, doubting his belief until he reached that belief that he cannot doubt. Okay, and what is that? That he is thinking. Because even if he doubts, when he doubts, he thinks. And if he thinks, he cannot doubt that he exists. Therefore, cogito ergo sum. Okay? So, here, what is being emphasized here is the power of man to think for himself. Okay? The power of the consciousness of man. The man is, of course, we cannot dismiss or we cannot just ignore the idea that there are two things, two kinds of beings or realities, the spiritual and the material. And Descartes expressed this uh, principles in terms of what he calls the res cogitans, meaning the mind, and the res extensa. So the res cogitans are the spiritual substances like the mind, and the res extensa are the physical beings like the body. Okay. So Descartes believed that we are composed of two principles, the body and the soul. But these two principles are separate and distinct because the material and the spiritual are two different substances. Okay, but this idea of Descartes of separating the body and the mind actually created lots of problem for modern philosophy because how can you explain the uh, the relationship between the body and the soul if they are totally different, if they don't communicate? No, because like for example, I'm giving a lecture here, my mind is of course working at the same time, my body through my mouth, okay, through my speech organs and even my hands are actually in the same motion as I think. So anyway, then, of course, aside from Descartes and his fellow rationalists, we have another group of philosophers during the modern era, the empiricist thinkers, who focused on the experiential side of man, focusing on man's sense experience. So, if Descartes and the rationalists focus on reason, that's why I call the rationalist, the empiricists focus on man's sense experience, empiricism. Okay. And there are many philosophers we can think of here. One is Thomas Hobbes, who constructed a rather uh, naturalistic or materialistic interpretation of man. He interpreted uh, the mind as a kind of part of the you know mind as part of the physical or the material. Okay, so uh, he he uh, he developed a materialistic interpretation of the concepts, like concepts like the mind, concepts like reason, life, in a in a materialistic way. Okay, and then of course you have Locke, a very influential figure in English or in English thought, who continued this empiricist tradition, and he focused more on the experience or on the empirical experience of man. That man gains knowledge through sense experience. That man does not have any, innate ideas, inborn ideas in the mind. We gain our ideas through sense experience. Okay. Well, there are many other philosophers we can talk about in modern philosophy, but we're just giving you a very general rundown of the important thoughts in modern philosophy. Now, let's focus now on contemporary philosophy. Contemporary philosophy, especially when it comes to the conception about man, is dominated by the existential by the phenomenological philosophers, the existentialists and phenomenologists. Of course, there are other philosophers during the contemporary era that also contributed to our understanding of man or the human person. There is the dialectical materialism of Descartes, I'm sorry, of Karl Marx, and of course there are the neo-Thomists like Jacques Maritain, Etienne Gilson, and there are many other philosophers. Okay, but one thing that we can say about the uh, contemporary conception of man is that they focus on man himself, not necessarily on his reason, not necessarily on his sense experience, but on his existence. What is the meaning of man's existence? What is the human person really? Because the human person is not just a soul, he's not just a body, all right? He's not just reason, he's not just sense experience. There's so many things going on. There's just so many things in the human person. For one, the human person is a subject. That's why they focus on subjectivity. Okay? Subject. And what do they mean by subject? That man has an inner life. He's a wellspring, meaning there is an interiority. Okay, an interiority. What is this interiority? Well, this interiority is composed of the wishes, of the thoughts, of the aspirations, of the fears, of the dreams, inside the human person. He's a subject. He's an internal life. He's not just, an object like this laptop here or your cell phone. They are objects because they don't have interiority, they don't have thoughts, they don't have desires, they don't have wishes. Human person, they have desires, they have thoughts, they have aspirations, they have their own fears, they have their own, problems, etc., etc. So they focus on the very existence of man and what it means to be human. Okay, the meaning of human existence. So that's the focus of the contemporary philosophers. That's why many would consider the contemporary philosophical notions of man would be focusing on human existence. Okay, focusing on his inner self, inner life, his freedom, his relationship with other people. So there's the concept of subjectivity, our inner life, and there is the notion of intersubjectivity, meaning our relationship with other people. Okay, so man is as a subject, man is unique. Okay, unique in the sense that yes, although we have some basic characteristics, but our inner experience are so different. We all, for example, we all fall in love. Okay, so love is something that is a common experience, but we have different experiences of loving. Okay, so there is the commonality there. We are all subjects, but what is inside that subject, what is inside this interiority is different. And it's not that just we have interiority, we express ourselves, we express that inner life, that subjectivity through what? Through our body. So man is conceived to be an incarnate or embodied subjectivity. All right. So we have our consciousness, we have our feelings, we have our desires, our dreams, and we express our consciousness, our desires, our dreams through our body. We are an incarnate subjectivity. And we're not just subject. There are other subjects, there are other human beings around us, and we relate with them. That's why they also focus on our intersubjective relations. Okay? On our social relations, on our relations with other people. All right? So, this brings us to this existential anthropology or personalism. And what do you mean by existential anthropology and personalism? It's a kind of a conception of man based on his existence, okay? The meaning of his existence, okay? And we look at the meaning of existence, focus on his freedom, we focus on his relationship with other people. We even focus on the end of his existence, which is death. Okay? This man is temporal. This man is finite. He will not live forever. Okay? We are temporal. Man is temporal. But why personalism? Because the focus was on the person as a human subject, a subject. Okay? A subject who must give meaning to his own existence. Okay? So, that in a nutshell, very short introduction to the Western conception of man. There are many things to learn from these different philosophies, and what I have done in this discussion, in this lecture, is just to provide you with, a big, a general overview of these conceptions, and we're going to discuss them in details in the succeeding lectures. So thank you very much for listening. I hope that you have gained, uh, a general overview, a general understanding of these different conceptions. Okay, and as I've said, we are going to discuss them in details in the succeeding lectures. So thank you very much for listening. Stay safe and God bless.